Warning. There isn't really a point to this video. It was supposed to be a showcase of a mod I was doing to my Wii, except that I botched the mod and ended up destroying my Wii in the process. So of course, I thought, instead of letting both it and 10 hours of footage go to waste, I might as well try and salvage it into something I can upload. So if you were expecting this video to be about some crazy game-breaking glitch that bricks your console or something, I'm sorry, but you won't find that here. But hang on, please don't click off the video yet. If you have any interest in just modding in general, I think you'll like this one a lot. As far as I know, there is not another video on YouTube showcasing this mod. And even though I clearly was not good enough to actually do it, it has been proven to be completely possible. So with all that out of the way, sit back, relax, then please go easy on me in the comments. I am not very good at soldering at all. This is my Nintendo Wii. Well, it was my Nintendo Wii. When you take a closer look, you'll see that it's missing the power button, it has a random GameCube controller port soldered onto it, some jank has clearly been done to the memory card slot, and it has a disk drive from an older Wii. Yeah, you're probably wondering something like, what the heck was he trying to do to this thing? Well, the short answer, I was trying to play GameCube games. The long answer? Well, we're gonna have to go back a couple months for that one. Specifically, earlier this summer when I was on vacation in LA. I got to do a lot of cool stuff up there. Recreating a scene from Iron Man 2 at the exact same donut shop where they filmed the original movie. Heading up to Universal to check out Super Nintendo World. Great place, by the way. And to top it all off, I stumbled across an old game store called Marrow Games. This place was actually pretty cool. It wasn't as elaborate as a lot of other old game stores I'd been to, but it still had a good amount of stuff and a nice variety too. I also found an original copy of Sonic Adventure for the Sega Dreamcast. I haven't seen that one a lot, and I thought that was pretty cool. But that wasn't the only cool thing I found. While I was browsing through their GameCube collection, I spotted the game that was on the top of my must playlist. A game that I've been looking for years now. Paper Mario: The Thousand-Year Door. I'm a longtime fan of the Paper Mario series. From the original game on the N64, to Super Paper Mario on the Wii, to Origami King on the Switch. These titles have given me some of the best gaming experiences of my life. And from what I'd heard, The Thousand-Year Door was supposed to be the best by far. But it was also by far the hardest to get a hold of. Before now, I'd only ever seen it for really expensive prices on eBay. And apart from this one, I'd never seen it at another physical location, period. So there was no chance I was letting this copy slip away. It may have set me back a bit financially, but I didn't care. You better believe I walked out of that store with Paper Mario: The Thousand-Year Door in my blue plastic bag. I'd heard such good things about this title that I could not wait to go home and boot it up. Except there was one problem with that. I didn't actually own a console that could play it. Yeah, that was a bit of an issue. At the time, my Nintendo console collection didn't consist of a GameCube or even a Wii that could play GameCube games. Wait, what? A Wii that can play GameCube games? Yeah, in case you didn't already know, most Nintendo Wiis were built with backwards compatibility for their older brother, the GameCube. But hold up, I just said most Wiis. Yeah, after a certain point, Nintendo just stopped producing Wiis with GameCube compatible parts because it just cut down on production costs. And as it turns out, my Wii is one of those newer ones. You can't pull up the top part of the console to reveal the GameCube ports because there aren't any there in the first place. And even if they were there, the disc drive is a newer version anyway that doesn't accept the GameCube's smaller discs. So it looked like that was a dead end for playing Paper Mario as well. Except it wasn't. You see, I'd heard a rumor that if you were able to put the older GameCube parts back onto a newer Wii, it still has all the hardware required, so it would play the games perfectly. And so, I reached out on BitBuild, an online modding community where you can post questions, work logs, or anything having to do with your electronics projects. Once there, I asked if this GameCube Wii transplant thing was even possible at all. And one of the BitBuild senior members, Stitches, said yeah, this is possible. And that was all I needed to hear. After doing a bit more research, I was ready to jump in. I learned that all you needed for this project was an older Wii disc drive, a GameCube memory card slot, and GameCube controller ports. Yeah, that was it. No software mods, no CPU transplants. This is a surprisingly straightforward project. As for me, I already had all these components lying around, because as it would happen, I killed a Wii a couple months ago. For a different project. Isn't irony funny? Anyway, it's about time we take a look at the modding process itself. Step 1 was to remove all the GameCube components from the old motherboard they were mounted to. This part was pretty easy. All I had to do was painstakingly desolder it from the motherboard by cutting it and burning it and melting it and ripping it and everything that is awful soldering etiquette. This process would have been so much easier with a tool called a hot air rework station, but I don't currently have one of those, so I had to go the more DIY route. Eventually though, I get the parts disconnected and then it's on to disassembling the Wii. This is the one step of the project that I'm pretty sure I did in a normal, socially acceptable, not dangerous way. Once I had everything out, I removed the disk drive currently in the Wii and replaced it with the one I had gotten from the donor. Just to make sure everything was in working order so far, I threw in Paper Mario to see if it would boot. And to my relief, it did. Did. That's some epic foreshadowing right there. Alright, now that everything's disassembled, it's time to start reassembling. The first hurdle was getting all of the solder off of the Wii motherboard itself so I could slide in the GameCube components. Again, this step would have been a lot easier with a hot air rework station, but I managed to get it done with just some flux and good old copper desoldering wick. Now that all the solder's clear, it's time to start fitting in the GameCube components themselves. As you can see, I cut off each individual controller port just to make soldering them on easier on myself. This part was definitely time consuming, but there weren't all that many pins to solder to the motherboard, so overall it was pretty simple. For the time being, I decided to just mount one controller port. This part took so long that mounting the other three before I even knew the first one worked would just be a huge waste of time and effort. Since Nintendo never planned on GameCube controller ports being on this motherboard, there's a lot of passive components missing that are required to make the controller work. All I'm doing right now is using little bits of magnet wire to reconnect those components. In case you're trying to attempt this project, I'll throw a link in the description of the BitBuilt forum where you can learn what components actually need to be connected. With everything for the controller done, now it's time to move on to the memory card slot. This process is pretty much a harder version of the controller port relocation. There was a lot more solder on the motherboard and a lot more pins on the memory card slot that needed to go into those holes. This step took a lot of finagling, but eventually I got all the pins in and I thought they were connected well enough. With everything assembled, I threw in Paper Mario and prayed that I'd done everything correctly. Alright, now for the actual moment of truth, where we can see if everything I just did is completely useless. Press any button to continue. No way! No freaking way! No way that worked. What? The controller works. The controller works. It worked. Kind of. For some reason, every button on the controller was registering as the same input. So when I tried to press start to leave the title screen, the console didn't recognize that start was supposed to be start. It thought it was some other face button. I figured I'd wired something up incorrectly by the controller port, but just to make sure, I reset the console so I could jump into my homebrew controller testing app. Except the console wouldn't turn on again. After a couple hours of brainstorming and troubleshooting, I finally realized that the memory card slot that I thought had been soldered on decently enough was actually causing a ton of shorts and freaking out the motherboard. Okay, I don't know. This is the weirdest thing ever. The memory card port. How I soldered it on was shorting out the Wii from powering on. This was a really bittersweet moment. On the one hand, I knew what was wrong with the Wii now and I could take steps towards fixing it. But on the other hand, fixing it would be undoing the most time-consuming part of the process so far. And I was definitely not excited about that. But after accepting the fact that it had to be done, I desoldered the memory card slot. Turns out, my diagnosis was correct. With the memory card slot gone, the Wii began booting consistently now. So far, there had been a couple snags in the project, but I hadn't made any mistake that was completely irreversible. Yet. At this point, I was pretty tired of messing with the memory card slot, so I decided to go back and try and get the controller working again. As you'll remember, I had all the magnet wires going to the wrong locations on the motherboard, so I just resoldered those back to the correct spots. In hindsight, I really wish I didn't do that. I don't know if it was because I was tired or I'd been working on this project for like 9 hours already, but I started making a lot of mistakes with the solder. I used too much flux when I was trying to reattach the magnet wires, so it had run all over the board, and the solder flowed down to spots it definitely wasn't supposed to. That in itself would have been okay as long as it wasn't shorting anything out, except that it applied too much heat down there, and I burnt off the power button. Yeah, that was a bit of a problem. After the fact, I learned that you could bridge a connection on the MX chip and wire up any tact switch you want to act as the power button, but at the time, I didn't know that, and I was freaking out. My first thought was to take an old tact switch from my other Wii motherboard, the one that I'd taken all the GameCube components from, except on the new motherboard, the pads that I was supposed to solder the switch to, a few of them were burnt, so I had to get my craft knife and try and expose the trace, but then I burnt more of them afterwards when trying to apply more solder, so I had to expose even more traces, and then I accidentally ripped out a copper line from one component to another, which meant they weren't connected anymore, and then I tried to reconnect them with magnet wire, but I ended up burning everything all over again. And even after that whole nightmare of a process, the Wii still wouldn't boot. That meant that all the time that I'd spent disassembling the Wii, attaching the GameCube components, testing and troubleshooting everything, all that was for nothing. Despite my best efforts, the Wii was dead. I didn't have anything to play Paper Mario the Thousand-Year Door on. It looked like all the time I'd spent and all the money I'd spent was completely wasted. You're probably wondering, what was I going to do now? Well, me, being the sadistic person that I am, I just bought a new Wii. Turns out, Wiis go really cheap on eBay, and I was able to find one that was already GameCube compatible, so I didn't have to go through this nightmare, torturous, awful, painful, terrible modding process ever again. And while I was at it, I also bought a first-party GameCube controller, because turns out, Shank Mods is right. Something about third-party controllers just feel off. I don't know what it is. So after those arrived, I set them up, installed the Homebrew channel, because why wouldn't I install the Homebrew channel? And after all that, I was finally able to play Paper Mario the Thousand. Hey guys, just recording a quick update. As you can see, here's my new Wii. So this Wii's broken too. So it arrived a couple days ago. I tested it, and the first thing I noticed is this disk drive. Something is not right with this disk drive. Like, I'm gonna boot it up, and you guys can just listen to it, because it does not sound right. I cringed the first time I heard that. That is not what a Wii disk drive is supposed to sound like. So, let's just show you guys. Let's try and test it out. Just in case this thing is going to scratch up my discs, I decided that instead of testing it with a game that I really don't like and don't care if it ever works again, I figured I'd test it with my favorite Wii game of all time. This thing's a classic. If you've never heard about it before, you're a normal person. Should be making a whole lot more noise. Unable to read the disc. This game just doesn't want to be played, I swear. It is doing everything in its power to keep me from playing it. After talking to the seller, he assured me that the Wii was functional before he shipped it, so we can only assume that this must have happened in the mail. Thankfully, he was really understanding and was willing to send a replacement. While it did postpone my Thousand-Year Door playthrough, look on the bright side. Now I have another Wii that I can sacrifice for some stupid project. But anyway, now, after all that, buying a Wii that couldn't play it, trying to make it into a Wii that could play it, breaking that Wii and buying a new Wii that could play it only to find out that it couldn't play it because it broke in the mail, I could finally play Paper Mario the Thousand-Year Door. Except, that would be a pretty unsatisfying way to end the video. You guys just listened to me talk about modding my Wii for 12 minutes, only to have me give up on the mod and buy a Wii that already had everything I wanted. I feel like it'll be a good way to cap off this video by reviewing the mod, pretending I'd done it correctly, and whether you should attempt it assuming you have all these parts lying around. Despite what I've probably made it seem like, this mod is not hard. If you have all the right tools and you're willing to put in the time, you'll find this mod is relatively easy to do. The only reasons I messed it up is because I didn't have the right equipment at my disposal, I tried to take shortcuts, and I definitely overworked myself. If you can avoid all these issues, and trust me, you can avoid all these issues, this mod is a walk in the park. However, in terms of the final product, I'd have to say this mod is pretty redundant. At the end of the day, all you're getting is a jankier version of a Wii that already exists, and a Wii that's definitely not hard to get a hold of. I only spent like $35 on my new Wii, so unless you were in the oddly specific position that you own a not GameCube compatible Wii and GameCube compatible Wii components and you had nothing to do one afternoon, this project isn't really worth your time. Am I glad that I attempted it? Well, apart from the fact that now I'm a Wii mass murderer and have fed my obsession by blowing $70 more on Nintendo hardware, yeah, I'd say it was pretty worth it. At the end of the day, I'm able to make this video, I'm still able to play Paper Mario the Thousand Year Door, and I gained a lot of soldering experience, to the point where if I were to attempt this project again, I get the feeling I would nail it pretty easily. Great, I just jinxed it. Now I'm doomed to be a Wii serial killer. What's next? I'm gonna start ripping Nintendo DS's in half and pretending I'm making Game Boy Advances out of them? Pfft, how stupid is that? Definitely not something I planned on doing at some point. Hey guys, thank you so much for watching this video. I know it's a little bit different than the content I've made in the past, but this is a project I've wanted to do for a while now, and thank you guys for sitting through it regardless. I have a lot more videos in the works, and if you want to stay tuned for my next upload, well, you know, there's a button for that. And if you want to check out some of my previous uploads, feel free to click the ones on screen right now. Anyway, thanks again for watching, guys. I hope you're all having a great day, and I'll see you in the next one.